On the night of my wedding, while everyone cheered and the band played, my new sister-in-law slipped close and whispered in my ear so only I could hear. "Enjoy the spotlight tonight, Celine. Tomorrow."
I'll make sure this house remembers only me.
Her voice was sugar-coated venom. The smile she wore for the crowd cut deeper than any insult. That night should have been a blur of vows and laughter and my grandmother's lemon roses. Instead, a cold settled in my chest. I'm Celine Marin Vale. I married Cassian Vale 3 months ago, the man who could make me breathe and laugh and feel like a home. What I hadn't imagined was that marriage would place me inside someone else's kingdom. Maris Vale, Cassian's sister, moved through the house the way a queen claims a palace. She knew every habit, every shelf, which cousin disliked pepper, which drawer held the clothespins. Her control was patient and practiced. She could reposition a photograph and no one would notice the shift. She could smooth a conversation and leave you standing in the crease. From my first morning in the house, small things arrived pre-assigned. Cassian's coffee cup at his usual place, the honey shifted to his side, a towel folded with the crease exactly like hers. She called those moves thoughtful. When guests came, she introduced me with a light laugh. "Celine's still learning our ways." People smiled politely. They didn't see the napkins she'd quietly replaced with a newer embroidered set, or the way my wedding photo was nudged to the back of the mantle as if it were a memento, not a memory. Cassian didn't see it either. He read her precision as care and affection. He called her guardianship family and shrugged off the little cuts I complained about in private. He didn't hear her compliments folded into threats, the way she corrected my stories, helped with the cupboards and later donated my anniversary dress, or the way she'd rearrange a room I had lovingly decorated. These were not grand slights. They were small, surgical gestures, messages deleted from the family chat, invitations that somehow omitted me, the annual winter dinner where she rewrote the seating so the family portrait always had her center stage and me perched at the edge. Each tactic was a pinprick that eventually numbed. I am not the sort of woman who falls apart in the dark. I learned to keep light inside me. I took evening classes in floral arranging and practiced small domestic crafts until my hands knew quiet competence. I volunteered at the library, helped a neighbor's child with math, and I began keeping a ledger, a small, ordinary notebook where I noted the times and places of the tiny erasures. A napkin missing, a letter moved, a phone call ignored. It felt petty to write it down. It felt necessary. The first public rupture came at the Valerian family's founders' evening, a quiet night when the family read letters and shared memories. Maris insisted she host. She lit every candle, placed the old letters with theatrical care, and read them aloud, annotating margins as if the words existed by her permission. When I stood up to tell a story, how my grandmother taught me to wrap lemon peels and mend a hem that lasted, Maris interrupted with a polite laugh. "Oh, Selene, your memory is sweet, but if anyone truly remembers those days, it's Maris. She's kept the old ledgers." Laughter followed. They accepted the correction, my words folded away. That night, lying beside Cassian, I pressed my forehead into the pillow and felt the ache of being edited out of my own life. I thought about the small changes she'd engineered, the calendar reworked so her volunteer hours were bold and mine faded pencil, a framed photo of Cassian with a tiny caption only she saw. She wasn't merely preserving a past, she was rewriting it to center herself. It would have been dramatic to storm out then, to confront her at the table and fling the ledger across the mantel. Instead, I sat very still and made decisions. I would not feed her appetite with a public breakdown. I would not let my anger become her spectacle. I would learn the rules she had been playing for years and use them with a patience she didn't expect. So I began to catalog discreetly receipts, who had been called to which dinner, which heirloom was moved, and when. I labeled boxes in the attic where family linens and albums slept. I whispered a quiet thank you to the maid when she, by chance or kindness, returned the embroidered napkins to the drawer. Small recoveries mattered. When Maris posed at the next family portrait, arranging her shoulders like someone who never suspected a history might be questioned, she didn't notice the ledger tucked beneath my coat. She didn't know that I could remember where every fork had been moved or which invitation had been edited. She didn't know that I was not simply the new bride learning customs, but a woman keeping a careful, quiet record. This is where my story actually begins, not at the altar with vows and songs, but in the cramped, accumulating indignities of domestic life, the whispered corrections, the moved photographs, the thin, polite laughs that erase. The stakes were not a fortune or a title. They were the dignity of my daily existence. And dignity, once chipped away, powers a kind of storm you don't see coming. There's a cruel thing about subtle wars. They don't leave bruises. No one can point to them and say, "Here, this is where it hurts." Instead, they slice beneath the skin until you start doubting your own pain. Maris understood this better than anyone. She didn't scream, didn't shout, didn't openly insult me. She engineered her battles in whispers and in glances. The first time I realized just how far she'd go was during Cassian's birthday dinner. I had planned it for weeks. Cassian's favorite roasted duck, the cake with hazelnut cream his grandmother used to make, even the string lights in the backyard, just the way he liked when we first dated. When I brought the cake out, candles glowing, the family clapped politely, and then Maris leaned forward, her voice carrying across the table. "Oh, Celine, that's so thoughtful. But Cassian always hated hazelnut, didn't you, brother?" I froze, cake knife in hand. Cassian looked between us, confused, then shrugged. "I don't really remember." The truth was, he loved hazelnut. I had baked him this exact cake the year he proposed. But with her words, she rewrote history in front of everyone. The laughter, the nods, the shift of eyes. It made my truth feel like a lie. Cassian blew out the candles, kissed my cheek, and thanked me anyway, but the doubt lingered, and Maris's smile told me she knew exactly what she'd done. From then on, the house became a chessboard. I'd place a flower arrangement in the hallway. By morning it was gone, replaced with her orchids. I'd suggest inviting my parents for dinner. Suddenly, scheduling conflicts appeared, though I never saw who moved the calendar. I'd wear a dress Cassian once adored. Maris would remark that it was a little too much for family, and Cassian's eyes would flicker with hesitation. Each move was small, each cut plausible, but together they carved a cage around me. I tried telling Cassian once, sitting him down late at night when the house was finally quiet. "She's trying to erase me," I whispered, "piece by piece. Can't you see it?" Cassian sighed, tired from work, his fingers rubbing his temples. "Celine, Maris is just adjusting. She's protective, that's all. Don't take it so seriously, protective." The word burned. Protective of him, or of the empire she had built inside these walls long before I arrived. So I stopped asking him to fight for me. Instead, I began to fight silently. I started with the photographs. Every time she moved our wedding photo to the edge, I returned it to the center, without a word, without explanation. When she changed the menu, I cooked anyway. When she rearranged the living room, I invited guests and watched their compliments land on my design. It wasn't open war yet, but I knew what I was doing. Each quiet correction was a line in the sand. And that's when Maris escalated. The winter gala was always the Vale family's grandest tradition. Everyone attended, cousins, business partners, even local officials. It was the night reputations were polished and paraded like jewels. Maris had always been the hostess, but this year, as Cassian's new wife, the responsibility fell to me. I spent months planning the seating, the music, the food. I even restored the old family chandelier that had been covered in dust for decades. For once, I wanted no whisper to undo me. On the night of the gala, as guests filled the hall, I felt something close to pride. The lights shimmered, the music floated, and Cassian's smile, warm, real, proud, was mine. But then, as the speeches began, Mara stood up uninvited. She raised her glass, her voice carrying like a hymn. "To family," she said, "and to the traditions that keep us whole." Tonight reminds me of when I first hosted this gala years ago, before Celine joined us. Some things never change, do they? The applause was instant. Guests nodded, clinked glasses. In that single toast, she had shifted the entire evening back to herself. I became a footnote in my own event. That night, after the last guest left and the music died, I walked into the kitchen to find Maris leaning against the counter, sipping wine. She didn't even look at me when she said, "You did well tonight, but you should know, in this house, history doesn't belong to the newest chapter. It belongs to the author." And then she smiled, as if the entire war was nothing more than a game. I wanted to scream. I wanted to throw the glass from her hand and shatter it against the tiles. Instead, I walked past her, heart hammering, and whispered so only she could hear, "Even authors can be erased." That was the night I stopped being polite. Because Maris thought she had already written the ending of my story, but I was only beginning to write hers. The day the war turned visible was the day of Cassian's parents' anniversary. 50 years of marriage, 50 years of tradition, the kind of milestone the Vale family treated as holy. The house itself seemed to buzz with anticipation, cousins flying in from different cities, aunts polishing silver trays, children rehearsing songs. By evening, the dining hall was crowded with faces, voices, and the weight of legacy, and as always, Maris moved among them like she owned the air they breathed. She wore crimson silk that shimmered like flame, her hair coiled high, a queen without a crown. People leaned toward her, laughing too loudly at her jokes, praising the smallest details of her efforts. The flower arrangements, the seating charts, the music she had overseen. Watching her soak in their admiration, I felt that familiar knot twist in my stomach. But this year, I wasn't content to stand silent in her shadow. For weeks, I had been working in secret, piecing together something fragile but powerful. Old photographs carefully restored, stories gathered from forgotten relatives, a timeline of the family's history stitched together in my own handwriting. A tribute, not just to Cassian's parents, but to everyone who had quietly held this family upright. The overlooked, the erased, the people like me. When the night began, it felt like maybe, just maybe, my plan could work. Candles cast golden light on polished glasses. A violin swelled in the corner. The smell of roasted lamb and herbs filled the hall. For a fleeting moment, I believed I had carved a place for myself at last. Then Maris rose. Her glass glimmered in the candlelight as she began, her voice trembling just enough to sound sincere. "This family," she said, pausing for effect, "has stood strong for 50 years because of tradition, because we never let go of who we are, and I have been honored all these years to keep those traditions alive." Thunderous applause followed. I watched her soak in it, her smile widening as if the night belonged solely to her. Then her gaze slid across the table and locked onto mine. The look in her eyes wasn't gratitude, it was victory. She had stolen the moment again without lifting more than a wine glass. But not this time. I rose too. My hands trembled under the table, but when I opened my mouth, my voice came out steady. "Tradition," I said, each syllable clear, "isn't about one person clutching the spotlight. It's about the sacrifices we don't always see, the quiet hands that hold everything together while someone else takes the credit. The room froze. The clinking of silverware stopped midair. For the first time since I had married into this house, every single eye turned to me. I reached for the leather-bound book I had prepared. My fingers brushed its cover like armor. When I opened it, photographs spilled across the table. Black and white snapshots of the family's first home, handwritten notes from grandparents long gone, memories pieced together from voices nearly forgotten. I read aloud, the meals cooked by great aunts no one mentioned anymore, the nights uncles had worked through storms to repair the roof, the bedtime stories told by grandparents whose names Maris rarely let pass her lips. One by one, I pulled these truths into the light, and as I spoke, I saw faces soften. People leaned closer. Some even nodded. Then I closed the book with a quiet finality. Tradition isn't preserved by one voice. It survives because many refuse to be silenced. The silence that followed was heavy, charged, alive. Even the candles seemed to flicker against it. Across the table, Maris's knuckles whitened against the cloth, her painted nails clawing into the fabric. She opened her mouth once, twice, but no clever words came. Her weapon, her voice, had failed her. When the applause came, it was hesitant at first. A few claps, then more, until the room filled with it. Not thunderous, not frantic, but steady, real. Applause that wasn't for her. That night, after the guests had left and shadows stretched long across the hallways, Maris cornered me near the stairs. Her face was stripped of charm, her smile gone. "You think you've won," she hissed, "but you don't understand. This house is mine. It always has been." I didn't flinch. Not this time. I met her eyes with the steel I had carried in silence for too long. "No," I said quietly. "This house belongs to no one. Not to you, not to me, but it will never again belong to your lies." Her breath caught. She said nothing. For the first time since I had known her, Maris had no words. The days that followed were subtle, but they carried weight. Family members asked me questions directly instead of through her. My wedding photo, which had once been shoved to the side of the mantel, was returned to the center and stayed there. Cassian finally began to see the patterns I had carried alone for months. Maris still lived under the same roof. She still moved like a storm through the halls, her presence sharp as ever, but something had cracked. Her throne, built from whispers and erasures, was no longer solid, and she knew it. This is where my story ends, not with fireworks or crowns, not with applause that never fades, but with a truth that burned itself into me, deeper than vows, deeper than promises. Sometimes the fiercest battles are invisible. Sometimes the cruelest enemies wear the smile of family. And sometimes the greatest revenge isn't destroying them, it's surviving them, outlasting them, refusing to be erased. Because I was never the guest in her kingdom. I was the storm, and storms don't ask for permission. They leave their mark.